Thank you, Grassroots, for having me. Friends of Bellport Bay is actually a grassroots effort that started about 18 months ago. And the catalyst for this great grassroots effort was Hurricane Sandy. And a group of us got together in Bellport Village, and we decided that we were going to make a difference in the quality of our bay, Bellport Bay. So we developed a mission statement. It's a four-prong attack, and today I will focus on our first two missions. And the first one is to support the new inlet that opened up due to Sandy by opposing the manual closing of the inlet and by keeping the public informed of its status. Our second initiative is to plant shellfish in sustainable areas in and around Bellport Bay. Our third and fourth initiative is to decrease direct nitrate runoff into Bellport Bay and to educate and update the public on pollution mitigation strategies. My other co-directors are Katia Reed and David Pate, and the three of us focus like a laser on our four missions. Initiative number 1, inform Bellport Bay communities and the general public of the current status of the new inlet, or what was known as the breach at Old Inlet. I'd like to take you back in time to an historical map. This map was created about 20 years after the Revolutionary War started, and it's a map of Bellport Bay. This is the Mastic Peninsula. The Smith Point Bridge to Smith Point Park would be approximately right here on the map, so it gives you perspective. This is the Patchogue Bay area. Back then, in 1797, there was an inlet which was labeled on this map as Southern or New Inlet. That inlet also exists on a map that was created in 1829. This is a map that actually shows the greater Great South Bay. Here's Fire Island Inlet. Here's what is now Heckscher State Park, Patchogue Bay, and then here's Bellport Bay, and you can see this little opening here which was the inlet. It was later known as Smith's Inlet, named after the Smith family who occupied what is now the Manor of St. George in Mastic. But by 1857, the inlet doesn't show up on maps. This was a map created by the U.S. government as part of their first survey of the shoreline, and the inlet doesn't exist here. We do know that the inlet was closed by 1830, and that was due to several ships that foundered in the inlet, causing it to shoal up and close. Since then, the Fire Island area has basically remained the same. This is an area opposite Bellport known as Old Inlet. This little island is called Pelican Island. This island over here is called Ridge Island. If you look closely, you see a little T-dock there. That's the Old Inlet Dock facility. What happened next, on October 29th, 2012, Hurricane Sandy slammed into our coastline, altering the shape of our shoreline forever. As most of us know, there were 3 inlets created in the eastern part of the Barrier Island system. 2 were closed immediately by the Army Corps of Engineers. They were hoping to close this other inlet that was created opposite Bellport, but we were able to keep them off the beach because of several reasons. One is it was in the National Wilderness District, and there is a contingency plan in place that says breaches shall not exist in the Wilderness Center. However, the National Seashore has done a great job amending that plan. This is what Fire Island looked like in that area before Hurricane Sandy, and this is what it looked like right after Sandy moved through. Here again is Pelican Island, and back then on November 11th, which is approximately 3 weeks after Sandy, the inlet took on a shape that was about 40 yards across, and it was kind of perpendicular to the beach. Here is that Old Inlet T-dock. Here's an image that I snapped from the Patasquash Gun Club, which was situated on Pelican Island. It's looking south over the Barrier Island. You can see in the center of the image that the inlet exists. Most of the sand that existed on the Barrier Island was pushed northward into Bellport Bay. At this time, Fire Island is connected to Pelican Island by the sand that was thrown northward. Here's an image I snapped of the inlet looking east towards Smith Point Park. Back then, 3 weeks after Sandy, the inlet was approximately 40 to 50 yards wide. Here's a great comparison slide. It shows the inlet, how it existed about 5 months after Sandy, on March 25th, 2013. The second slide shows the inlet how it existed this past summer, 3 years later. Although the inlet has changed shape, it wobbles, it rotates, the volume of water going in and out of the inlet has basically remained the same, according to the data. Here's another vantage point offshore that shows a 3-year span between March 2013 and April 2016. Again, the inlet has changed shape. As expected, inlets will migrate and rotate and eventually close, and so will this on its own over time. Here's a wonderful shot that shows the inlet looking east towards Smith Point Park, which is in this area over here. And this also captures the ice flow. You can see here that the ice in Bellport Bay was basically kept at bay because of the introduction of warmer ocean waters in February and March. And this is important when it came to Friends of Bellport Bay deciding where we were going to put our oysters. I'd like to take a moment and talk about what the National Seashore has been up to. They recognized right away that the inlet cut their national park in half. And according to a breach contingency plan that was in place, it stated that all breaches shall be closed manually. However, the National Seashore took a deep breath and decided that they were going to investigate this situation a little more closely. And I'm happy to report that they decided that the beach contingency plan that was in place was outdated, and it does not adequately address the management of breaches in the Fire Island Wilderness Center. So they decided to, as required by law, to prepare an environmental impact study. And the current status of that study is as follows. In September of 2015, they called out for an environmental impact study. On August 31st, they opened up a period of scoping and they collected public comment, which ended on October 8th. They are currently reviewing all the information, and they are scheduled to release a draft proposal as to what to do with the inlet later this summer in 2016. And there'll be a 45-day period where the public could comment on that draft proposal. It is our position at Friends of Bellport Bay that the inlet should not be closed manually. Why? This slide shows a good reason why. This slide shows brown tide. You can see this dark brown area in Bellport Bay and a lighter area near the inlet. This is a good example of how the cleaner ocean water, when it floods Bellport Bay, pushes the brown tide back or dilutes the brown tide, thereby allowing an ecosystem to prosper once again. Why should the inlet remain open or not be closed manually? Because here is another slide that shows the water quality in the greater Great South Bay, actually around Long Island in our harbors and in our waterways. Normally, in the early summer, there'd be a red dot at Bellport Bay. Patchogue Bay, the water quality is considered poor on this particular day. The water quality in the Mastic Moriches area is also considered poor. And sure enough, Bellport Bay would be also red at this time. But because of the existence of this wonderful silver lining that Sandy presented us, we have a green dot in Bellport Bay. And that green dot spreads east and west. It just doesn't stay in Bellport Bay. Here's a wonderful slide that overlays aerial photographs on Google Earth, and it shows the inlet as it existed last summer. I will note that this area here is where Smith's Inlet closed. So this new inlet, which we call Bellport Inlet because it opens up into Bellport Bay, is starting out where Smith's Inlet started out, and it too will migrate and move westward as Smith's Inlet did, and eventually close. But we oppose the manual closing of the inlet. I just want to take a moment to show you an image of Bellport Bay looking from the west bank of the inlet. You get a good idea of the sense of the clarity of the water from this slide. Although the water quality of Bellport Bay has improved greatly due to the existence of the new inlet or Bellport Inlet, we decided that it was a great opportunity to do even more. So we decided that we were going to plant shellfish, because shellfish are excellent water filters. They remove nitrogen from the water column and deposit it on the bay bottom, where it becomes fertilizer for bay bottom plants. And that brings us to Friends of Bellport Bay Initiative number 2, to plant shellfish in sustainable areas around Bellport Bay. We contacted Cornell Cooperative and contracted with them to purchase 15,000 spat. Spat is baby oysters, and in this case, Cornell Cooperative hatches baby oysters on hard shell. We purchased, through donations, 15,000 spat. We also contracted with Brookhaven Town, and they donated last year in 2015 100,000 oysters for us to plant in Bellport Bay. We also collaborated with the National Seashore, and they allowed us to, through a permit process, plant shellfish within national park boundaries. We chose a location in Bellport Bay at a place called Ridge Island. This is a great location because not only is the fetch eliminated, the warmer ocean waters that come into the inlet in the wintertime will keep the ice away. And ice is the number one problem with destroying oysters on a shoreline. So we got to work. We got to work gathering the volunteers, bringing them up to the Brookhaven Town hatchery at Mount Sinai Harbor, Cedar Beach, where we began the process of sorting oysters. We took them out of Mount Sinai Harbor, we emptied them into sorting trays, we cleaned them, we scrubbed them, we separated them by size. We put them in bins and brought them down to Bellport, where a core of volunteers got together and subdivided them into smaller containers. Here's an example of that subdivision into these little white containers. Then the volunteers loaded the oysters on a fleet of small boats, in this case a bunch of little whalers. We transported the oysters out to Ridge Island, where the community got involved. They took their quantity of oysters. Paddleboarders, swimmers, boaters, sailors all participated, planting these oysters in a little cove on the south side of Ridge Island. Last year in 2015 we planted 100,000 oysters and oyster spat. Volunteers came from all sorts of backgrounds, blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, kids, adults, older folks. We all participated. Our goal is to create an oyster reef in the south cove of Ridge Island. Here's an example of what the reef looks like today. This next slide shows you what the size of the oyster that we got from Brookhaven Town looked like in June of 2015. A little bigger than a couple of fingers. And this next slide was 5 or 6 months later. An oyster can take up one's palm right now. According to Cornell Cooperative, Greg Rivara, the oyster growth in this area is unprecedented. That's because the bay is full of nitrates. I just need to credit the great volunteers of Friends of Bellport Bay. Not only are we making a difference, we're having a great time doing it. And what's important to us is to ensure that the younger generation is involved, because it is they who will shepherd a better environment into the future. We can't succeed at creating a sustainable shellfish colony if we continue to pollute the bay. It is time that we act and decrease nitrate and pollutant runoff into Bellport Bay, thereby allowing the shellfish to flourish. We first must admit that we all contribute to the problem, and we must take action. And that is why Friends of Bellport Bay has 2 other initiatives. We are also assisting communities along Bellport Bay to improve and update their direct stormwater runoff systems. And we are also educating and updating the public on pollution mitigating strategies and results. Because we don't want to see this. And we're not far from this. This is a fertilizer runoff algae bloom. This is what we want to see. And we are close to getting there. You can find us on Facebook. I thank you for your time.